So it should be going now. And I kind of like the style of podcasting where, I mean, I'm not a podcaster. I don't think I've never really started a podcast, but I like the informal conversation of it, you know? And so I'd like to kind of get it rolling and just start it and rolling. So we'll ask Shavetta as she comes in. And I guess my first question for you, Nick, is you're kind of just got started with basically Litterati and running this kind of head of cities kind of model. And I'd love to just know more about your origins first, because you came from a city government background. And I'd like for you just to explain a little bit about that first to get started. So give us some more information on your origins and how you got started in your career.
Sure. Yeah. I'll tell you the quick version of it. I've had a pretty wildly career, kind of going through many twists and turns that got me here, but it's been a fun journey. So basically, after right when I was about to graduate college, I was an English major. That's what I graduated with, and I wanted to be a writer. That's all I knew I wanted to do. And at the end of college, I was starting to get more politically active. This was kind of at the time of kind of the Iraq War was kind of at its height. We just had a presidential election. There was a lot kind of going on in the country, and I was just kind of awakening, becoming more aware of it. And that awareness kind of put me in a place where I just felt a little weird just going off to, the places where writers go, like New York City or LA or something, to just try to become a writer. I felt that there was a lot going on in this world that people needed, people with good energy who wanted to do good things. So that led me to join the AmeriCorps NCCC. And actually, it took me from Philadelphia, where I'm from, the Philadelphia area, out to your neck of the woods. So I was stationed at McClellan Air Force Base outside of Sacramento, and I was an NCCC server, as they call it, so the National Civilian Community Corps. And even though I was in California, it bounced us back down to the Gulf Coast because this was right after Hurricane Katrina. So I got that feeling of what it is to be doing public service. And, when you're building someone's house next to them, when they just lost it in a storm like Katrina, it does something to your soul, basically. And it really got me in this path of public service. At the same time, I started getting really into growing food and farming. And this was kind of at that time, the country was really kind of getting back to this, local food movement. It was kind of reemerging in the mid 2000s again, after, many times that it had emerged. And I started getting into farming. So that put me on a path of kind of public service and the earth to growing food, horticulture, agriculture. So it brought me back. I did a little bit of travel after the AmeriCorps, after my term of service, and I came back to Philly. And Philly has an amazing urban farming scene here. So I ended up getting really steeped in urban farming, which led me to get more involved with other aspects of greening in the city, which ultimately landed me a job at Parks and Recreation in Philadelphia and city government. So I came to the department and ran a workforce development program. So I worked with youth. So I'm no stranger to this. We worked on training young people to work on the land for jobs and getting them almost queued up to go into like Parks and Recreation jobs. I really liked that job. And then that kind of led me into another role as the sustainability manager, because I was always kind of thinking about sustainability and kind of pulling it in because of my organic farming backgrounds and things of that nature. And I had a great career at Parks and Rec. I did a lot of cool things, started getting into recycling and composting and food recovery. So the kind of higher ups in the city, my bosses, saw me doing all this, and they said, we have this new position that's opening up for the zero waste and litter director. We're starting this big new initiative to create a zero waste plan for the city and really address Philadelphia's really bad litter problem. And they said, do you want to do it? And honestly, at first I actually turned them down because I loved working at Parks and Recreation so much. I loved being outside on the land with my hands in the soil. And I was teaching these sustainable land care trainings. They were really fun. And I had this moment of kind of, just vulnerability in front of one of the grounds maintenance guys that I was friends with. And he just was asking me how things were going. And I told him that I had this opportunity. And he said to me, he's like, Nick, I really love what you're teaching us here. This is what I signed up for: planting, mulching, and doing it in a sustainable way. It's really cool. But all we do is pick up trash. Our town is so littered. That's all we really have time for. So all the stuff you're teaching us, we really can't do. And that really affected me. And I was like, wow, this is a huge issue. This is a good opportunity. So I ended up taking the job as the zero waste and litter director. And I served there for 3 years in the city of Philadelphia, put together this great plan that did everything from zero waste goals like composting, enhancing our recycling, reducing waste, to really addressing our litter, and doing it by using technology and data. So when COVID hit, it kind of reshuffled a lot of our city government. City budgets took a huge hit. And it seemed like my time to move on was kind of coming up. And I ended up moving on, and luckily enough, found an opening at Litterati. They wanted someone to kind of start building out their cities programs, and I just started very lightly, kind of as like almost like a consultant type way. And now, as we've grown, and Litterati is doing a lot of great stuff, which I'm excited to talk about tonight, they made me head of cities. So here I am.
Very exciting. And there's a lot there to unpack because you're talking about you're a sustainability manager, before in the city government, and there's a lot to unpack there. And then kind of start with this park and recs kind of piece is interesting too, because it comes from kind of that kind of youth side that you're talking about, right? Like there's a lot of recreation, like when we're talking about parks and recs for city governments, we're talking a lot about engagement with the community, right? So you have this, it all aligns to me. Shavetta, hi. Glad everything works for you. Glad you're here. Maybe you can introduce yourself to Nick and your background with PilotCity, your employer, your project last year, and so forth.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I'm kind of late. I actually had a little bit of issue joining, but yeah, hey, I'm Shavetta, and I was a former coding intern for PilotCity, and I am glad to be here.
It's great to meet you, Shavetta.
All right, so we have Shavetta here to feel free to interrupt me at any point where you find burning curiosity, Shavetta.
Yeah.
And I'll be sure to open up some time for you to plug in as well and make a little pause at any given moment. And we also have some attendees here who are watching, a little small crowd of interested students and teachers to kind of get us warmed up for our flagship. And so feel free to ask questions for those who are in the audience at the moment, and we can answer those towards the end. And before we go any further and go into conversation with Nick, I do want to let everyone know about why you're here and what this program's about. So PilotCity runs a work-based learning program where we scope out projects with employers of value to them, and then we give them over to students to create solutions for them. And those projects that you develop during the school year can earn you and win you opportunities to further execute on those projects with the employer over the summer as a intern or as a fellow or as an entrepreneur in residence. And our program does start on February 26, 2021 for this particular year. And so these 1-hour podcasts and interviews or job shadows and externships for teachers is essentially a format to get you excited and warmed up and taste testing different employers for you to join the program. So thank you all for joining us. So Nick, I want to kind of unpack more about this kind of public service piece that you started off with. I think it's really fascinating that you start off with that part, and you're kind of an AmeriCorps kind of affiliate, it seems like, as well. So take us back a little before, like right before you decided to go down that path, right? How did you think about your career? How did you think about your pathway in life? And how did you decide to kind of go down this path of public service at the start, and then, and even accepting the position with the city?
Yeah, I feel like I've always been community minded and like, caring about other people and kind of somewhat, altruistic in that sense. But, I wouldn't say like I'm, it's a typical young person. I feel like in my view, for all those, good attributes, I definitely was into my own things, right? I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to write about my experience. I had, and I loved reading. I loved writing. I loved being an English major. I loved reading about other people who did, these really cool things and wrote these great stories. And I feel like it was, I wouldn't say self-serving, but it was kind of more about a little more self-indulgent. It was more about kind of like, what do I need? What is my career going to be? It was a me kind of thing. And actually right before I decided to join the AmeriCorps, again, I was having more of this nagging feeling of what was going on in our world. Again, I'm talking to a different generation who's growing up in a very crazy time, probably like the most, extraordinary time to be a young person growing through this pandemic. But, when I started college, 9/11, it happened 3 weeks after I started, right? And our society drastically shifted after that. And then, with we had wars going on, and our country going to war and all these different things. And it was hard to kind of just, again, the me started to kind of fade a little bit. I started feeling almost like wrong, or kind of, it didn't feel right to kind of like have that kind of focus. So I would say right before I was graduating and I had these nagging feelings, I took a trip going snowboarding. So where I live, there's a lot of snowboarding mountains. I got a 1.5 feet of snow on the ground right now. And I did it with a friend who I kind of knew, and he was a missionary, actually. He worked through his church, and he did a lot of work volunteering, and he was telling me all about the stuff that he had done. And I'm not particularly religious. I didn't think the missionary path was for me, but the way he just described, the way he talked about being in service to other people and trying to help people, really spoke to me. And that's what really kind of made me want to explore public service and explore the AmeriCorps. And again, I'm not going to lie, it was a lot of fun and exciting. I got to travel all over the United States doing all these cool projects. It was a lot of fun, but it definitely planted that deep seed in me of public service. And again, it carried into as I got out of college and as I got out of the AmeriCorps, and I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And I was traveling around and trying to figure things out. I was always gravitating towards positions that were either with city government or working with city government or a nonprofit, things of that nature. And that's what kind of landed me with the city of Philadelphia. And again, having that other love of just getting your hands dirty. I mean, I know there's people here, coders, and you guys might not have your hands in the soil, but yeah, the same type of love when you're like, creating something beautiful, a beautiful piece of like technological architecture, that kind of that craft, it's something you really value. So those two things combined really, again, it was like kind of what queued me up to join the city.
I think it's also really important to highlight the kind of me aspect, right? Because the me aspect essentially is a young person not necessarily knowing exactly what they want to do, or what they understand or what they care about. And when you discover more about me, right, you understand more about the world, right? So dive into that. I know we're gonna retracting into more of your more of the, before you were born or something like that. But tell us more about that sense of purpose you were desiring. This logo actually right behind me is actually the streetwear company that I started about 10 years ago. And it's actually a perspective view, right, of pursuing the unknown, even though you may not know what's to come, but that you want to go down a path that you care about. So, was it a sense of purpose you're looking for? Was it a sense of like, I'm not going to settle for anything besides what I really love doing? What was that intention, right, behind wanting to find more of yourself and to do that type of work? And because it obviously translates till now, right? When now you're helping Litterati,
Sure.
save the planet by cleaning up litter around the world. So
yeah, there's a lot of literary parallels that we'll pull into it. But I think, one first I want to say is that it's definitely not just a young person's thing. I'm Derek, you could probably attest, and I could, there's plenty of adults that I know that still have the me that never kind of broke out of that. And I think, again, you have to look out for yourself and kind of like have like some kind of self-reliance and kind of like, make sure that like the things that you're doing are making you happy. But I think what I learned was what made me happy. I like going out and hanging out with friends as much as, the next person. When bars were still open and restaurants, I love going out to dinner. I love hanging out, being social. Like those things are very fun to me. But when I really found a sense of belonging and a sense of, where I saw kind of like the social meld with kind of the purpose, right? And like the vocation was around, service. Like the cool thing about AmeriCorps, for better or worse, sometimes it was a little trying because basically I lived with these people. We traveled together. We lived in the same place. We worked together all day, went home. Like it was a lot of being with the same people all the time, but being in that sense of community of like-minded people that wanted to do something good and make the world a better place. And I think that's a really big power of Litterati. As we'll talk about tonight, there's many layers of Litterati and different organizations and structures of government we work with. But at the end of the day, we really like talking about the community that we've built. Even though we're a tech platform, the community is really important to us. And that's not just like tech speak for, why we like to get clients. It's more in users. It's more about like we know the people personally who are going out and like making change in their communities using our products. And I feel like when you're surrounded by people like that, social engagements, your life, the way you view things just changes. And for me personally, it just felt more fulfilling to have a friends group that I was also able to connect with on a deeper level of some of the missions that we were on. So,
yeah. So let's get into some sustainability management kind of items. All right. So sustainability managers are actually quite new within city governments. I don't think I've seen them. I mean, I also haven't existed in the professional world for too long. But I'd imagine that sustainability managers typically didn't start trickling in until really around now or the last 5 years or 10 years, right? And so tell us about your work at City of Philadelphia and kind of the work around sustainability at that time. Was Philly leading a lot of the efforts? Was there, what aspects to your programs were innovative and interesting and helped lead the way towards the future of what you now know of sustainability management within city governments and climate action plans and so forth.
Sure. Well, first I have to give credit where credit's due. And a lot of the West Coast cities had paved the way a lot for this kind of thinking around, sustainability directors. These the sustainable development goals from the UN, from the United Nations have been around for a while, especially as, climate change was first kind of really understood and what was happening to our planet back in the mid to late 80s to now. I would say, so Philadelphia first got its first sustainability office, or actually the mayor's office of sustainability. So it wasn't a full department yet, and a director back in 2007 with our mayor, Mike Nutter, who was a huge champion for that. And he was building a lot of what he was trying to build in Philadelphia city government off of what he'd seen, especially cities like the Seattle's, the San Francisco's of the world that had these directors. So that's when Philly kind of really jumped off. And I would say early 2000s was really when a lot of cities were starting to see this. And we created our sustainability plan called Greenworks. And the cool thing I think about it was that it wasn't just one department just sitting on an island by itself. A lot of the departments within city government started getting attuned to this and saying oh, we should have sustainability management. I worked for a very forward-thinking person. Again, that's what's so important about this career aspect. The young people who are on the phone or the meeting today, they're going to hear from a lot of different employers. And I was really lucky back in 2010, I met a person named Mike DiBerardinis, who was the commissioner of Parks and Rec at the time. And he became a mentor to me and gave me a shot, gave me a chance to kind of sustainability. He understood it. He understood we have to get this right. Because if we don't, the alternative is basically destruction of this planet. And it's funny, he came from a service background. He was a community organizer in Philly, worked his way up through different jobs and ended up, being commissioner. And he's actually who became managing director and then took me over to become the zero waste and litter director of the city. So, there was a good basis in leadership, and I think that it's not a one-way street. It's not everything can't be from the top down. You can't just dictate sustainability and everybody's going to do it. And it can't always just be from the ground up. It can't always be the activists and the community people demanding it, right? It has to be a feedback loop of, and we'll talk about feedback loops a lot tonight, of, leadership, creating and Mike would always say this. He's what we're trying to do is rebuild the social compact in this country, which has been completely destroyed. That it's, what can city government do? What can general government do to kind of create an equitable playing field that gives people the opportunity for success? And how do you have people then kind of find their place in getting that success and building their lives and living, lives to the highest potential that they could possibly do? How do we figure out to do that for all people in our society? And that's really what our mission was. And that was the mission Mike gave us. And sustainability plays into that, because if you can't sustain it, then you're never going to reach your full potential. And people you can't get the real equity without it. So there's all this intersectionality between all these topics. And that's kind of the thinking that kind of brought me into Parks and Rec. And this was the thinking that really drove a lot of the work for a time in Philadelphia city government.
So, and let me get the timeline straight here. So you, did you do Park and Recs before the sustainability manager role or after?
Well, so I was the Parks and Rec sustainability manager. So for that's what I was saying about that specific department. So not only did we have a sustainability director in the city, we had managers of sustainability within certain departments like Parks and Recreation. Yeah. I know SEPTA, our SEPTA is our regional transportation system, our subway and our trolleys and everything runs off of SEPTA. So they have a sustainability manager. So all these different departments, and then we're all connected. We're all kind of working towards the same goals of trying to add on to the general sustainability of the city.
That's very fascinating. A sustainability manager within each department or division, even of each department. That really is systemic at that point. So you talked about a baseline and a leader that helped kind of enable you, but also help kind of guide you as well and get you in the right direction. Mike, it seems like, right?
Yeah.
And so, how would you characterize the importance of leadership in an environment like that?
Yeah, and again, it gets back to that thing of the me, and then the service mind. Mike had a service mind. Mike was a community organizer. I was a community organizer before I met him, and that's why I think where we connected a lot on is why are we doing the things we're doing? What are we doing it for? You could ask that about corporation leaders and CEOs. You could ask that about politicians, governors, senators, mayors. why do what you do? Why? Just to get power, just to get money? Or is it because you intrinsically, or you truly have a deep-seated belief in making people's lives better? And I was lucky to directly work for and have a lot of good experiences with people who have a deep feeling for wanting to make people's lives better. And that's what, again, attracted me to Litterati, where the founders of our company, Jeff Kirshner, who you and I both know, mutual friend, Jeff and Dick Ayers, who was our, co-founder, they have a deep-seated belief in making cities better, making them cleaner, making people's lives better. And those are the type of people that I like to work with. And so and then the leadership, pulling those levers of power. If you're pulling the levers with that in mind, you're going to pull the right levers. And I feel like when things don't go wrong, the right levers aren't pulled. I think they're being pulled sometimes for, not the right reasons. And I think that's a really big a mark of leadership.
So let's unpack a bit about litter, okay? But let's unpack a little about litter before you even joined Litterati, okay? Let's talk about the city and the litter initiative that you got pulled into. So you said no initially, and you probably didn't have any background on litter necessarily, but you probably knew it's a practical problem, right? So you probably was a problem-solving challenge. So, what do you share a little more about, that decision to go into doing some of that in the city, but then also what you actually did and how some of those things you did dovetailed into your, understanding of what you're doing now?
Sure. So a couple things with it. One is I always had a mind for like not wasting things, right? Like, again, my age or my grandfather grew up in the Depression, and he would always say to us, he would like say things like, take all you want, but eat all you take, and like not waste things. He had that Depression mindset, like don't waste anything. And when I became zero waste and litter director, people would question that, like, oh, what's your credibility? Like, what background do you have? Are you a solid waste management professional? Like, no, I have a farming background, and farmers are the original zero wasters. Because when you run a farm right, there's no waste on a farm. So I already had that mindset of like just not wasting things and always feeling uneasy about waste. Like, leaving food on a plate, just throwing it away and not thinking about it, just buying whatever you want, creating all this trash, right? So that was in my mind. But when it came to litter, I was like the normal person. And I think it goes back to the me thing. It was just like this, it's gross. Like, why do we have this? Why are we seeing litter? Why is this happening? Someone clean it up. Why do people throw stuff on the ground? And then when I started really getting into it, and, again, through all my volunteer coordination, whether it was for a garden or when I worked in the workforce development program, I would see people change, right? Because I didn't litter. Like, I never really had it. I had friends that did. I remember a friend once I was driving with him, he threw something out the window, and I was like, are you crazy? Like, what did you do? And it was like, he did it, right? So, but I remember working with young people, and, I saw the power in what it was like to clean stuff up. We were like doing a cleanup of a creek bed one time, and the one kid turned to me and he was like, I'm never littering again. This is crazy. Like, when you start actually doing it and feeling what it's for. So that opens your eyes. But I will give the forewarning to anybody watching this. I will definitely want to work with students from, or young people from Pilot City. But I will give the disclaimer that once you go down this rabbit hole of litter, there's no turning back. Once you start thinking about it and where is it coming from and how is it happening, it is so mind blowing that this is happening to our society, and we have to do something about it, that it's going to open this up. So this is kind of not to say you're going to just,
I already know where you're going. I already know where you're going with this. I mean, it's a black hole to me too. And that's where this opportunity is right now.
Yeah. We're sucking people into, that's what we need to do, because it's a systemic issue. It's not just because people are throwing stuff on the ground. Looks are very deceiving. It's not a certain type of person that litters. It's not demographics. And a lot of times when people say things like that, it's very classist. It's a lot of times racist, of who litters and how litter happens. It's a major systemic issue. And when you really start peeling it back and unpacking it, it gets complicated. And what I love about Litterati and the beauty of it is we're giving the tools to kind of uncomplicate, to really figure it out, to understand these levels. And that's a big thing of what I was doing in the city of Philadelphia. It wasn't just, first off, we're a very poor city. We're the poorest big city in the United States. So we didn't have money to just say, we're just going to street sweep every day. We had to say, we have to stop the waste from happening in the first place. And that's why zero waste was connected into it.
And certainly, Shavetta, if you have any particular questions, please pump in. And anyone in the audience who has some questions, please ask questions in the Q&A box in the bottom, because we're going to answer them later.
Terry, if you don't mind me changing, kind of switching the topic a bit. So, Mr. Esposito, you said that we need to like start stopping this whole littering issue as a whole instead of just street sweeping every day, right? So I was wondering, how exactly does Litterati help with identifying this issue and kind of making everyone connected into it, and like, you know, everyone connected and stop trying to stop it together as a whole, as like a whole community?
Sure, sure. And I'll say I definitely appreciate you calling me Mr. Esposito. If you want to, you can do that, but you can call me Nick too. So whatever you're comfortable with, you call me whatever you want. So yeah, so basically the way Litterati works, and this is, you know, a good time to get into this, is, you know, it's like the old saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Picture tells 1,000 stories. Is that, and actually the way it started was our founder, Jeff Kirchner, lived in the Bay Area, and he was hiking with his daughters one day, and they were in nature, and they're in beautiful nature. And then all of a sudden they look down and they see, I think he said it was like a bunch of like kitty litter in the box from the kitty litter, like someone dumped on a trail, right? You're like, I see your face, it's, you know, his daughter had the same reaction. She's like, why is this here? Like, how did that happen? And Jeff was like, this is crazy. So he just took a picture and put it on Instagram. And all of a sudden, like, you know, Jeff thought all his pictures were great and like his, you know, whatever he was doing, how interesting his life was. But this picture got so many likes and so much engagement. And he was like, wow, that was crazy. So he started doing it again and again. And he started seeing people like, again, that first initial reaction, like, oh, litter's the worst. What's wrong with people? To like, why is it happening? How did that get there? And these questions started rising. So he was like, there's something to this. So it put him on this, again, down that black hole in the rabbit hole of creating a technology that basically could take a picture of litter, and then you can, what we call tagging it. So we tag all of our pictures. All of our pictures are geolocated. So we know it's all mapped out where people took the picture, who the user is, when it happened, and then the what. So we are able to use a tagging method that captures the material, object, and brand. So if this bottle that I've been drinking out of was on the ground, it would say, okay, it's a bottle, it's aluminum, it's metal, and it's Hydro Flask. That's the brand that's on it, right? So you would tag that and put it in the picture. So what we've done at Litterati is, after we've gotten a whole community to continue to take these pictures, we've now have the ability, because we have about 9 million pieces of litter pictures in our database, to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to start training algorithms and computers to really understand what that is. So now, like when Litterati first started, you'd have to actually really write out like, oh, it's a can, it's this, that. Now our ML model is getting such to the point where you can just take a picture and it's just going to come up with those tags. Right now we're in a place where it's kind of like the computer and the human working. It's like when you write an email in Gmail and it predicts kind of what you want to say. That's kind of where we're at right now. But we have a great data science team. Our machine learning is just growing. The more data that we're inputting, it's really helping, or, you know, improving. So that's basically the base of what Litterati does. And then when you take all of that data and you actually start processing it, you start to see patterns and insights within that data. So we're, you know, when we start getting into what the actual projects and the potential are for the PilotCity folks, you could do this deeper research to really start to get to the why and the how of litter. And when you start to understand that, then you start to understand the strategies that can work to actually prevent it at its source.
Really great start of a description of Litterati. And you know, I'd like to unpack a bit about the kind of unbelievable kind of shock when people do kind of throw out, you know, litter out their window or whatnot, right? Like there again, it's this behavioral evolution that our society has undergone to get to the point where we have the courage to trash our own environment, right? But what are you guys finding, right, by having this app you download on your iPhone or Android to take pictures of, and people are documenting kind of on it's almost like an Instagram for litter, right? You know, when you are collecting all this, what insights have you discovered along the way, even before you even got there, and now and future? What are you discovering about the behavior, right, of using this app in society with 9 million pieces of data?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of really good behavioral science out, and there's some really great, you know, behavioral scientists who have studied this issue. And I think a big one is conditions predict behavior, right? So if a place is highly littered and there's a lot of litter in an area, it's going to increase people's chances to possibly litter. If there's not enough waste management infrastructure in an area, whether it's a trash can or a dumpster for when people are taking their trash out, or even good trash cans. Like I'd say in the city of Philadelphia, one of the main places where litter comes from is not people throwing it on the ground. It's from how we put our trash out. So when I live in Philadelphia, it's a lot different probably than maybe the houses that you all are in like California. So we live in these like small, we call them row houses. And I know they have them in San Francisco. Those really cool, row houses they have, but like our whole city is like that mostly in Philadelphia. So it makes it really hard to have a trash can in your house, right? Because you have to kind of roll it from this little back, very small patio area through your house out the front door. Like people don't want to do that. So they put these smaller like recycling bins. They put like a paper bag with their recycling in it. They put trash bags that aren't in a bin that like squirrels will rip open and rats. And it leads to a lot of litter. So a lot of the litter we're seeing comes from that. So again, that's an infrastructure issue where you're seeing litter that's happening. So, and then you get into a whole other world, which is another rabbit hole of illegal dumping, which I'm sure maybe people have seen that, whether it's just household illegal dumping, like you don't want to store your trash because it's too much. So you go take it and put it in a public bin, and just like put it on top and walk away, or a contractor who has a truck full of, tires are a really bad thing in Philadelphia. I'm sure they're in a lot of places like California too, construction material. So you do a job, you take it somewhere, nobody's looking, you just dump it out of the truck and keep driving. So there's all these different behaviors that kind of, that lead to it. And so there's a good body of work of why these things are happening. So with Litterati though, what's kind of cool is if you just look at it like this big thing of litter, you can't start to piece together the puzzles, right? There are resources out there, but if you really understand, it's this is in relation to an overflowing trash can. And people, they don't think they're littering. They're just like, I have dog poop. I'm walking through a neighborhood. I don't want to walk with it anymore. I need to put it near this trash can, but the trash can's overflowing. I'll just put it on top right here, balancing halfway. And they're like, it'll be fine. And they like leave, right? Like that's another form of littering. That's not as like in your face as throwing something on the ground. Some people that are like, we call it the old, like, basketball shot where it's like, oh, I'm just going to throw it in that bin over there, and you throw, and then you turn around and start walking, and you don't know if it actually landed in, right? Like there's all different ways people litter. And a lot of times it is tied to the actual material. So by us better understanding the material, that's one piece. The other piece is waste. I mean, litter is the first indicator of the materials in our society that are overproduced, undervalued, and they're hard to manage. And that's what ends up on our ground. And, that's something that we need to better figure out as we research it. And that's what we're doing.
All right. So let's transition into what is, just give us a baseline, right? What is Litterati? What do you guys have as a tool? And what mission are you on?
Great. So Litterati is a platform that utilizes an app that's free to a whole community of people throughout the world. And when I say the world, we're in 185 countries. We have 200,000 users throughout those countries, and they've picked up 9 pieces of litter collectively through many different ways. And we're on a mission to eradicate litter throughout the world. We do believe that it is, again, I get this. I live in Philadelphia. I've heard people say, I've been here for a long time, litter is just a part of city life. You're never going to change it. You just have to learn to live with it. And we don't believe that. We feel that we can actually stop litter from happening and not just clean up our city streets, but clean up our oceans. It's a drastic issue. There'll be more plastic in the oceans by weight than fish by 2050. Like that's crazy, right? That's crazy. So we have to do something about this. So Litterati has our platform using our app and our dashboard. So the app is the first entry point where you're collecting the data. Once that data comes through, it comes to a dashboard. Now we have varying degrees of how you can access the dashboard and how you can use it. So the average person who just downloads the app for free can have their dashboard, and they can do, they take their pictures, they can get their information, they can understand litter a little bit better. We also have another aspect that we'll be working with PilotCity students on it's called a researcher license. So this actually allows you to walk like segments and kind of calculate on a certain street, or maybe it's a shoreline, or maybe it's a perimeter of a park, the litter that you were able to capture. And we have a whole training sequence for that to get the data, again, organize it and be able to start to learn from it. Going beyond that, though, we work with nonprofits throughout the world, like American River. We work with corporations throughout the world. We also work with cities all over the country. And when we do that, we have these special licenses that allow these larger entities to take those smaller licenses, like just getting people to go out and use the app or do research, and then get all of that information to flow into their account. So they could have, they could be engaging hundreds of people in their community to not just clean up litter, because that's the most frustrating thing. You go out, you do a cleanup, and this happens all over the world. Like people go do cleanups in cities. They feel really good about themselves. They get their volunteer t-shirt afterwards. They had a fun day. And then they go back to that same spot a month later, and it's just as littered as it was when they cleaned it up. And it just is like, oh God, that's so frustrating. So we're telling people, well, let's get data on it. Let's figure out what's really happening. And when all that data comes in, it goes back to the group that kind of got them to go out in the first place. So it might be that nonprofit, or it might be a city. Then those larger organizations can go through all of that data and again, start to find those patterns and insights that they could then make policy decisions, legislation decisions, and more informed data-driven decisions. That gets back to your question, Derek, about leadership. Those leaders who are just like, I go by my gut. I shoot from the hip. I feel that this is the right thing to do. Like, don't trust those leaders. Like, that is not a way to do business. Like, if you're trying to run society and make people's lives better, you need information. You need evidence-based theory, basically, to create real actionable things that are going to make someone's lives better. That's why data is so important. So when cities are armed with this data, they can make better decisions. A quick anecdote is, when I first came into the city of Philadelphia, their reaction to trash cans overflowing was to take the trash cans away. Like, that's crazy. I saw your eyes go up. Like, that's nuts. Like, there's a need there. That's why it's overflowing. People need to use that trash can. So taking it away, that just creates more litter. It's not a solution, although there is a problem about overflowing trash cans. So how do we solve that problem? Well, let's use data to do it. And that's what we did in Philly.
That is what's so fascinating, and why I've been semi stalking Jeff Kirshner for the last many years, because I really do think that this, I have psoriasis, so it's like a skin thing, and that pops up, and it's like a little plaque. It's like an autoimmune thing, but like it keeps popping up, right? It always pops up. There's no kind of getting rid of it unless there's a very strategic way of doing it, right? And I've changed my life. I've done, I quit drinking. I did all this stuff, to work out more. I tried being vegan, all this stuff, right? But in this particular scenario where litter is being littered, and you have a cleanup crew at the marina, let's go, get a t-shirt and get it on and come back and it's still there. It's frustrating. It's ineffective. It doesn't achieve any goals besides feeling good. And give some corporate people some interesting, PR, right? And so when we're talking about data, right, on litter, to help solve the systemic issue of why it's occurring, give us, what's the insight that you guys know that you can share of what allows Litterati to be able to be well positioned, right, to actually solve this issue globally, but also, of course, locally, right, as well, or vice versa. So what insights do you guys have, right, that's different from other solutions around the world that justifies you guys actually being well positioned for this?
Sure. So I think some insights are, one is the words corporate responsibility and what you're kind of describing before, that feel good, go out, get the t-shirt, say like, this corporation cares, we're out for the day. Like, that has evolved a lot over the years, where people are very cognizant of corporations have been responsible for many of the issues that our world is facing, right? When it comes to pollution, or it comes to resource scarcity, or it comes to how workers are treated and things like that. So between climate change and where we are as a country politically, and what we're talking about, especially around socially and then economically, how people are being treated, racially as well, the time for cheap talk is over. And most corporations know that. And, I just heard on the radio today, like, and I think it was like one of the big oil companies, like corporate share, quarterly meetings, before they never really talked about climate change. This meeting, after an hour meeting, they gave up about 10 minutes to it, right? And that's big for a lot. You have to talk about the whole company, and they're talking about their climate change policy. Like, this is real. Like, people have to act because it's too much in our face. So I think we understand that, and that we're working with corporations that are really like, they're not just trying to have that feel good, PR campaign about how they went and picked up litter, that they're actually like, we have to do something about this. On the city side of things, where I work, one thing that I would say with cities are that they are hotbeds for litter, because you put a lot of people in one place, you're going to get litter, right? And they spend a lot of money on litter, sometimes not even what they really understand how much they spend, because litter is you react to it. And what we also learn about cities is they're very reactive to litter, right? You get a complaint. Someone says, this is a mess, send a crew out, clean it up. Every time a city does that, I don't know if you guys have, I know you might have like my Hayward apps, or like
Yep, my SL is ours.
We have 311 in Philadelphia. It's like
we have 311 as well.
Yep. 311 too. So every time you call 311, you get someone to go out and do something that costs money. Like there's a person who has to get into a truck and they have to like drive out there, and it's their labor time, and they might have to use resources, and then they have to take it to a dump, that litter, and they have to pay for that. Like there's all these things that happen, right? So we're really trying to get cities to understand, like, what is the pain point? How much are they having to spend on litter? And then what are they able to do to actually change that dynamic? And I know this firsthand. In the city of Philadelphia, I worked with Keep Pennsylvania Beautiful. I got this awesome opportunity that they had commissioned a accounting firm to work in 9 cities, Philadelphia being one. And we looked at how much we were spending and how reactive it was. And we found out the city was spending $48 million a year cleaning up litter, and 85% of it was reactive. And like, that's crazy. We're just going to keep throwing money away. And again, that caretaker that I talked about in the beginning, who has to go clean up a park when he'd rather be, pruning a tree or planting or making it look beautiful to the best of its potential, he's not doing that because he's cleaning up litter and he's reacting. So we really understand this about cities, and we know that we need to change the dynamic, and it needs to be data driven. It needs to come from that top down, but we also need people to drive the change as well.
So let's talk about the project now. Okay. So what we have going on is Litterati has this tool, has some insights, got a lot of information, a huge mobilization force. And now you're offering a entrance for local community members to be more productive and more optimized in how we actually solve the core problem at hand, right? With information that you now have. And that's particularly working with communities in local cities, in local communities, to be mobilized to serve a particular purpose, right? So Litterati is challenging Pod City students to stop litter at its source, right? By utilizing the Litterati app to document brands, materials, and objects of litter, to inspire local leaders to make better informed decisions and investments towards a clean, litter-free city and world, right? So walk a student through how you would approach this and what they would use on your side to get started, and what mission you want them to eventually kind of get to by doing this.
Great. Yeah, so what we would like to offer Pilot City students is to utilize our research capability. So being able to what we call citizen science, and using our researcher license on the phone, that again allows you to do those segments. And with doing those segments, you're going to be asked a lot of different questions with that as you start your segment. Like, what kind of thing are you on? Are you on near a waterway? Are you on like a urban road? Are you in like a rural road? Like, where are you? What waste management infrastructure is around? What can you document around there? And then walk the segment, and then start to take the pictures of the litter that you see on the ground and document it. From there, we have a whole training for how you do that and how you walk that through. Then we are really going to work with, students and try to have some, materials and kind of, answer questions as the students that we could have more of a one-on-one relationship to give ideas for really how to use the dashboard, how to filter the data, and then really understand what you're seeing. So what is it that you're seeing on these routes? That's one way to approach it. If people just want to go out and they don't really know what they want to find. We also love working with people that might have thought about this before. They might have been like, it really just drives me crazy how much people are, flicking cigarette butts in the street, or throwing their to go. I know there's a lot of styrofoam to go container bans in California. Good for you. I'm glad that you guys do that. I wish we could do it more in Philadelphia. But if you see something like that, like this recurring theme, well, how is it happening? Where is it happening? So I just did my own research in my city around advertisements. People it's very common that people will take a pizza menu or these circular ads that look like newspapers and leave them all over people's properties, even if you don't want them. And it's a city like Philly that has steps. We call them steps. In New York, they're called stoops. In Philly, we call them steps. You're right there on the street. It's easy for it to just blow off your mailbox or blow out from your front door and then get all over the place. And then it becomes litter. And it's like, why is this happening? What can I do to document it And what I actually did was take my documenting and my, like I put together a presentation. I'm actually going to my city council right now to say, here's what I documented. Here's the data. Here's what I see as a problem. We need to do something about this and hopefully making some change. So we'd love to work with the students to understand how to use the technology, both from taking the pictures, how to use the, on the app, how to use the dashboard and integrate in the platform, and then what to do with that information, how to make change in their community. And we have a lot of stories of impact, strategies that we can share to really kind of get people thinking. But what we want to see from this is students to come back and say, hey, I did the research, I checked the data, I found this out, I put it together in this presentation, and it led to this policy change in my community. I made change because I had this tool and I was able to utilize it and use the data to do it. So that's kind of what our ideal is for how we would work with one of the people in the cohort.
Okay. So I want to be really clear with the people who are watching this now, but also watching this later. So what is differentiation between your standard app, right, that people download and use to collect litter, and the research license? And what capabilities do they have over the other?
So the standard app, you're going to be able to go through and just take a bunch of pictures for free. And again, we're offering this for free as well, the researcher thing, but basically anybody can take these pictures and you have them in your, back-end dashboard. You can kind of see how much plastic I picked up. You can filter it out. You can filter out kind of like, what zip code you were in, what days you have those capabilities to like look at your back end. But with the researcher license, it's really important because it allows you to really understand like the routes that you're walking. So it's a deeper way to kind of geo locate where you've walked and kind of collect that data in one easy to kind of understand thing. So you can say like on this city street, this is what it looked like. On that city street, that's what it looked like, rather than these random pictures that you kind of have to put together and kind of like understand on your own, right? So it's a little bit of like a shortcut to be able to kind of, process the data easier and analyze it and visualize it.
So it's essentially, instead of taking in a single picture that is geolocated and it has a location, you're essentially saying, I'm going to now intentionally collect data on this route, this area, this street, this marina, whatever, and you're toggling into that mode, right? And then you're collecting data in a story format that then automatically somehow kind of characterizes that litter in that route to start to define the locations that has the most litter to the city or to the community or to the stakeholders and so forth.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said most, because that really helps too, to say like, I walked down this street and I saw 5 pieces of litter. I walked down this street and I saw 100 pieces of litter. Like there's a problem there. Like, why is that happening? Right.
Yeah.
And that's in itself a really important piece. And if you look on the segments on our back end of our dashboard, it'll say, how many pieces you picked up, how far you walked, and how long it took you to do it. And then it has all those pictures in the little dashboard and stuff like that. And then you can, again, filter out by segment. You can compare segments to say, like on this segment, I found it was plastic bottles, but on this segment, it was cigarette butts. And why was that? Oh, that's because there was a bar right there. Oh, but in the place where I saw the plastic bottles, it was near like a sports court. Like maybe people are playing hockey or something or football, and then they're drinking, water bottles and just leaving them there. Oh, that's where it's happening. So you start to really understand, like, this is where we're seeing that litter. And then you know who to talk to, right? Like maybe that bar should have a cigarette ashtray out front, right? Like, again, I know we don't want to encourage people to smoke more, but it's like, we got to do something with these butts. So how do you kind of compare those different segments and again, start to really map out and visualize, what's going on?
So what's interesting about this evolution of the tool, right, is that it literally, what you're talking about, the research component, is really an evolution of the baseline tool, of starting to get to a point where people in communities and groups and cohorts can start to advance conversations without just the need to contact you, right, or contact Litterati to make things happen, because you're essentially, like those stoops and steps, are in particular neighborhoods and streets that the pizza parlor shop typically promotes to, right? So you're essentially creating these kind of aggregated storylines of litter, right? And starting to kind of put together those storylines to say, hey, this is insights on that storyline, and maybe someone has kind of an overlap in this road to kind of get, and it has the same stoops and steps there, and the bar that has the cups and the foam, the straws that are, that don't degrade or whatever, right? So,
Yeah.
and so, okay, so now students kind of have collected that data, what can be offered to the local jurisdictions, right? Because jurisdictions are like moms and dads that fund things to make things happen, right? So if we're going to mobilize a group of citizens in communities around the Bay Area, in the California, and in the United States to kind of do some of this work, and the data is collected, the storylines are collected based on the data, what can be presented to cities? What can be presented to county governments? What can be presented to elected officials? That's hard evidence that helps to advance their public works goals, their parks and recs goals, their sustainability management goals, right? To help advance their specific goals and strategic plans. How can tangibly students in our program solving this problem what can they bring, right, to their local city? And what can they tell them?
Well, so I'll tell you a great story, right? And I think this is one of my favorite stories, and it connects kind of all these different things that we've been talking about. I know we're getting close to time here, so I think this is a good, like a way to kind of bring this all together. So we have another product that's similar to the research, and it's called the campus license. And we're actually hopefully going to be working very closely to you guys soon to do this, to basically kind of geofence an area of a schoolyard and kind of have all that data that's happening, that's being collected there, captured there, right? So again, it's an easier way to process the data and put it in one place. So we did this project with the school district of Philadelphia. It's actually how I met Litterati when I was Zero Waste and Litter Director. They came on and did this project for us. They worked with one high school called Lankenau High School up in the northern part of the city here in Philadelphia. And when they were doing it, the students went out and they did the Litterati treatment on their schoolyard. And what they found overwhelmingly, and they were able to connect this back because they had the data. When you really sit down with the data and you process it back and you look at the pictures and you look at the brands, everything they were seeing on their schoolyard was coming right out of their own cafeteria. So that led them to believe, oh, these are students from our own school that are littering. So they took it upon themselves to say, okay, we're going to put a survey out to students and we're going to ask them, hey, like, we know it's you guys littering. Why are you doing this? Across the board, when they got the survey responses back, the students said, we only have 20 minutes for lunch. And when we're leaving the schoolyard or the cafeteria, and I still have a bag of chips, when I get out to the schoolyard, there's no trash cans around. It's back to that whole weird mentality in operations, like, oh, don't put trash cans out. They're more problems than they're worth. So that was getting all litter all over the place. And the students were like, what do you want us to do? Yeah, we litter. I'm sorry, there's no trash cans. So the students took that Litterati data to show the problem, the surveys to kind of really drive it home, and took it to their school operations. Now, again, I've worked with a lot of operations people. I've dealt with this before. They can, they're really hardworking, good people, but they're up against a lot. And it's easy for them to say, those trash cans are more work. They're harming, I don't feel like dealing with them. They're expensive. We have to put them out. We have to build all the problems of why you don't want to do it. But when the students had this very solid data set and presented it to their school operations said, no, you guys are right. It's not a big deal. We're going to put trash cans out strategically around so the students have to use them. They did that and the litter problems went away. And like, that's the power of it. Like, that's just one schoolyard in one little place in Philadelphia, right? But those students made a change that has continued to last on, and it wouldn't have happened if they didn't have the data and they weren't able to put it together and present it in the way that they did. And that's what we're hoping. Those little wins hopefully will become bigger wins, and we're hoping to do that with the Pilot City folks.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a great transition towards getting questions answered now. And it seems like what the I guess the ultimate goal would be is to eventually get to the point where people are using a tool called Litterati to be able to collect this data, build these insights on particular jurisdictions, and eventually it would come out to a point where it actually would start recommending to you what strategic moves to make as a community to actually mitigate trash, right? Like, imagine that school story on a larger scale in a neighborhood, right? And identifying particular areas that could use a trash can. Like, put the trash can that's, in this street that never gets used and put it over there almost, right? As like a solution.
Yep.
So that's what it seems like users are trying to look for in terms of solution sets, are data-driven recommendations, right? For cities to be able to make strategic decisions or tactical decisions to just mitigate litter and to make things much more robust in terms of, and using data to do it, right? Is that the ultimate goal for a community or city?
It. And we collect all these things and we share them with other people in our community, and it just keeps building and growing. And who did this strategy and how did it work? And keep having, we call them stories of impact. And as we make this impact, we tell these stories and it just spreads and we clean this world up.
Great. Awesome. All right, so let's answer some questions, Nick. And we don't have too many at the moment, so if you have questions, please write them in there. But Shavetta, any things that were just like burning in your mind as you're listening to Nick, and I was talking too much, something like that, that you didn't get asked.
No, I mean it was really good to hear about this because like you said, Nick, like litter honestly is not seen as so big of as a problem, and having an app like this that really brings awareness is a really good way to like start solving this problem. Speaking of questions, there's a question in the chat which I thought was pretty good. So Sahar asks that so Litterati collects data on the phone and then kind of processes that, and you kind of like find like patterns in there, right? So how else do you find these patterns other than like just like through the research without like the data from the research? What are other ways that we can identify these patterns and like also like get rid of them and solve the problem?
Yeah, so really it's on our dashboard. So when you're able to filter out your data and you're able to see like, okay, I've collected on this segment this many pieces, but overall it was this many pieces. So like say you collected 1,000 pictures, and of that 1,000 pictures, 800 of them were plastic bottles. Like that pretty overwhelmingly shows like there's a problem with plastic bottles here. Like something's going on. And again, I know in California, you guys have like the CRV and the ways you can get the deposits and stuff. So is it like what if it's in an area where all these are being littered and you still have a deposit system? Like, do people not know about the deposit? Like this is a hypothetical. I'm sure everybody knows about in California, but like, those are the things you can start asking. And it's like, what's happening here that is leading to this? And then what action could I take? So you really start to understand like the severity. You're not just seeing litter as this just like sea of materials. You're starting to break it down. So again, if you saw that it was like cigarette butts, it's like, okay, why is the cigarette butt thing happening? What's happening? Like there's many different ways that you can start to ask that why. And again, we're here to talk with you. And that's what this is part of. Like, that's why I always say this in my sales meetings. We're not a tech company where we just sell you the product and then you never hear from us again. Like, we're here to talk to you. We want to like understand, we want to give tips and trades, and like, we want you to find success using the app. But as you'll start to see, the patterns will start to uncover themselves. You'll start to see, like when I did my research with the ads, pizza menus, it's pizza shops. That was a huge thing, right? So do we have to tell every restaurant in the city of Philadelphia about littering menus? No, let's just focus on pizza shops. It'll be more efficient, right? So, yeah. And then I did see another question that was great because it's like it's a technical, like nuts and bolts. Like, I need to use this thing. So it was about having data on your phone. So do you need to have data on your phone to be able to use the app in the field? And the answer to that is no, it is not. So you are able to go and take the pictures and it will collect in the app. And then you can go and say, upload later. So when you get to a Wi-Fi signal and you get on the Wi-Fi, you can upload your pictures and then tag from there. So you don't need to have data while you're walking around and eat up your data. I will say for the researcher licenses though, I have to check on this for like most times you can, GIS still works on your phone, even if like data is not being up. But we will say that when you are using like the very accurate data location, it can eat up your battery a little bit. So you always want to make sure that you have like a nice full battery when you get out in the field and you have a way to charge your phone. Just, you never want to get stuck without without being able to use your phone. So if it dies. So that's just one thing to consider. But the other thing, again, we want our app to be very accessible. So our app works, the picture quality works in our processing, whether you have an iPhone 5 to like an iPhone 12, right? You don't need to have the newest model. You don't even need to have an iPhone. You could have many different brands of phones. Our app also comes in 14 different languages as well. So you can pick your language and we're trying to add as many languages as possible. But again, so sorry if your particular language that you're comfortable with isn't on there, but we have covered a decent amount. Again, we're trying to make it as accessible as possible.
What if I'm a student and I don't know where the litter is in my community and city? How would you, what questions would you ask yourself if you're a student who didn't know where the litter is, and just can't intuitively figure it out? Like how would a student identify where to start, in terms of collecting data locally to start building a local solution for the local, city or county?
It's a really good point. And I think that, there are, luckily enough for some people, some communities that when you walk their streets, it's very litter free. Philadelphia is a very weird city because we have a very bad reputation for litter, but actually our downtown is not very littered. It's actually quite clean. And when people come, they comment on it, that it's pretty clean, because there's a lot of services in, like, we call it Center City, Philadelphia, where they clean a lot and they keep it clean. When you get into our neighborhoods, though, the neighborhoods get really dirty. And that's what, like, and now our neighborhoods are getting a lot more kind of commercial activity, a lot more bars and restaurants and all things that are happening. And people are starting to see how bad the litter things are. So, you know, again, it's you sometimes might have to search for it. I will say kind of a surefire bet, which is really sad enough, is getting down to like waterways. Waterways tend to get a lot of litter in them because most cities, the way they work, the storm drains drain out into the rivers. So when litter gets down that storm drain really quickly, you might not have seen it, but it is going to end up in the river and it is going to end up floating. So that's a place where you can see it as well.
Would it be helpful to get started by looking at types of businesses and where they could have paper trails or breadcrumbs along the way? Would it be helpful to look at, waterways and see, how would you, what would you have students ask themselves, to start thinking about, where to go, not exactly where to go, but how to start thinking where to go.
I would say where people congregate is like a big one, right? So bus stops, right? When people are hanging at bus stops, they're finishing up food. I know we have a rule in Philadelphia, you can't bring food and drink on a bus. So if you're just finishing up a Coke can real quick and there's no trash can there, you just leave it on the bench and you're like, someone will get it, that weird type of littering, or you just throw it on the ground. So yeah, I would say bus stops are usually a surefire bet to find them. Vacant lots, like places where there's vacancy, you start to see trash. I don't know how much in your communities, like in Philadelphia, we have a lot of vacant lots. We lost a lot of population in the 20th century. So we have a lot of those. And that's where a lot of litter collects. Parks, even in like some wooded areas, you'll start to see it, like people throwing things in the back. Someone has a picnic, they don't feel like bringing their trash out with them, so they just kind of leave it, stuff like that.
Okay. Like one thing that I've been like, I love looking at a Cheetos bag, downtown and be like, where did this Cheeto bag come from? Or like McDonald's is really easy because it's like, oh, this McDonald's is connected to that McDonald's, like it. So I feel like it's almost like a follow the paper. It's like follow the breadcrumb scenario, right? A lot of it's just like, where do you care about? I care about downtown. I care about my neighborhood. I care about the marina. You find out where you care about and start to kind of just look for your first sign of litter, and then you kind of just reverse engineer the thought, and then you're almost like assembling a story as you do it, I would assume.
Yeah. We have a joke where it's like we we're going to film a season of CIS Litterati. Like, I don't know if there's any like CIS Miami or CIS.
That'll be our next project together. Have students create.
Yeah, we're going to film CIS Litterati, where it's like people are just like, where did this come from? Just like you're a detective. I mean, you're basically looking and following the trail, following the paper of where this stuff came from, for sure. I mean, that's what it comes down to, and really understanding how is it happening? Why is it happening? And trying to there are ways that you can make policy changes. Another good example is a bunch of students that work near a school that they found overwhelmingly these little I think this was in California, Taco Bell packets. Like they were finding them all over, and it was near so they went to the local Taco Bell and they were like, hey, can you, instead of just shoving the bag full of those little hot sauces that people don't use and they end up littering, ask them if they want them. And that was that's not a huge, it's not going to cost Taco Bell a crazy amount of money. They have to do a little training, might be a little annoying for the employees, but it's not that big of a deal. And it cut down on the litter cut down. They actually saw a reduction because just from simply asking if someone needed something. So they don't drop it on the ground.
Yeah. So fascinating how tactical, how simple the solution is and how actionable the solution is thereafter, right? We have a question from an audience here. Once we found the root of the problem, for example, like smoke buds or whatnot, do we confront the manager directly, or is there another way to confront them? I think how I'd like to kind of answer this, ask this question is, when someone in our community or people who are using Litterati app in general discover what the source of the problem is, how would you recommend taking action immediately, right? Or assembling a plan to present to the jurisdictions that be to confront the solution? Sure.
Yeah. So one, I'll say, I'm from Philly, and all of the stereotypes you heard about Philadelphians are true. I'll assure you, we can be kind of in your face type of people. So we would have to say this all the time. do not, like, especially with illegal dumpers, like, do not confront illegal dumpers. Don't go after them. Like, you don't want to get in a fight over litter, right? So it's just like, or, with a store owner, you don't want to go, so I think, like, again, it's the power of the data. So, but you're asking a good question, because if you do have good data and you have something, we like to use the word, again, I'm trying to be proactive here instead of confront, more of like engage, go and say, hey, I'd like to talk to the manager here. I'm a student from, this area. I did this research. I just want to show you what's happening. And we've had people do that with brands, and the brands, a lot of times, if they're a good business and want to stay in business, they'll say, okay, yeah, we see there's a problem. How do we figure this out together? And brands sometimes can, again, make those changes to how they give things out, or they can, like, help with volunteer days, sponsor volunteer days, things like that. So yeah, it's more about, like, thinking of it as engagement. And then also kind of like the power of numbers, right? Going to maybe there's a nonprofit in your community that does cleanups, or maybe there is like a political, like a politician. I mean, always remember that, city council people in city government, they work for you. Like, that's what they're there. That's what I did. I still feel like I do that as a public servant. I am serving the public. So they should be able to take a meeting with you and say, okay, well, what do you got? Okay, this is an issue. Okay, let's talk about it more. And let's see if we can get some. And then again, there's always, you guys are, again, I hate to use stereotypes on young people and kids, but you all are, growing up in this age of social media, you know how to get, put something on TikTok, do something on, I sound like an old person now. I'm sorry. It's like, put something on TikTok, but like, put something on, like, do something on social media, talk about it. And again, you're not just like an internet troll yelling about something. You're like, no, but a thoughtful person who wants to help, who has data and wants to spread a message and say, this is a problem, let's fix it.
I think that's the key is, Litterati is a data-driven app, right? So, like, as long as you have data and you can share with somebody just to have some facts together, I feel like that and I think going to the elected official is also really an interesting point, because that's a safe place, right? To say, hey, I want to talk to you about litter in our community, and you're in our jurisdiction, and approach it there. I think it's interesting to one thing I say a lot is, like, I don't know if I want to characterize youth as this anymore, but it's kind of like a positive joke. But it's you all have puppy dog eyes, right? And you all have the ability to confront people safely to some extent. But you are kind of like positive Trojan horses, right? To be able to solve some of these problems, because you have this kind of ability to have this innocence, and you just want to solve the problem, right? And so I'm not telling anyone to go and confront managers of McDonald's, right, or whatnot, or corporate brands, but to present them data and bring actionable solutions, right, to them. Maybe they'll take it, And I think the nicer you are, I would assume, the more solutions you probably would get, right?
Yeah. I want to have to say, Derek, I love your use of the word "use." We're gonna have to make you like a honorary Philadelphian. And then
I do think I'm a New Yorker at heart, is what I've discovered. But
yeah, that's exactly it. Like, this will hopefully empower you, right? You're not just like, go to the manager. And my manager might be someone who has no real power. They might just be, working a job, and they're just like trying to get their shifts and like get through. But they can say, like, hey, I'd like to have a meeting with somebody. Like, have some power behind it. Feel some agency to say, like, I'd like to, call a meeting. Like, I want to talk about this, and, and again, presenting it in a professional way. And that's something that's why I'm sure that's something you guys work on at PilotCity too, with like professionalism and getting in the workforce. That's something we can work on together.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Nick. I have one last question for you, and this is a big curiosity I have. Okay. This might be a hard question too, just a warning. How many people who use the Litterati app take a picture of it and actually throw away the litter afterwards?
That is a great question. So with the way we had the community and the way we did it, that was a big part of the community. Like, we're cleaning up litter and we're documenting it. When it comes to research, we've gotten a little looser with that, because, again, you're adding to the common good, right? Is that you are trying to get to the deeper source to stop it from happening in the first place. So we do have some flexibility with that, where if you, like, when I did my research, to be completely honest, I would say like about half, I did go out. I have bags of flyers that are still stored that I need to get like thrown away. But sometimes if I was walking with my kids and I was like, I was in the middle of so another thing, we have these things, we call them challenges. It's like a limited time of when you do the research. And that helps too, to say like, I did it at this challenge and that challenge, which the research license allows you to do that. So if I was like in the midst of my challenge, I really wanted to get pictures of litter and I had my kids with me, I couldn't like pick up litter, especially during COVID, and like walk with it and stuff like that. So I would just like take the picture and not pick it up. So there are times when you're not. Sometimes it might be part of your research. You might say like, I'm going to take a picture of this and I'm going to come back in a week. Is it all still there? That's another thing that could come up. That's like also showing like people aren't like, maybe the city's not responding as it should to clean this litter up. People aren't doing it in real time. It's just sitting there and it's going to collect more litter and more litter. Like those are interesting things. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. But again, we're flexible on that. We encourage, you to clean up. We're trying to clean the planet, but also if you're using it for the greater good, it's fine too.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that answer. That is it, everybody. I want to, before we close out, I want to give everyone an update on kind of what our actual, what the next steps are for people who are watching this, who are listening now, or in our program. So we are launching our flagship program on February 26th of 2021. It does look like we're going to have a digital hackathon when we actually launch our program between Friday, February 26th and Sunday, February 28th. And if you have any additional questions, you can always go to our website as a start. And we will have more of these with different employers along this entire month. And this will be content that you would also be watching in the actual program for Litterati as well. So that is it. Thank you all for coming, and talk to you all very soon. And Nick, why don't you stay back a little bit, and Shivetta as well.
Of course. Thanks so much, everybody.